Hello.
Hello, David. Am I audible?
Are you audible? I think you are. You could turn yourself up a bit. That'd be great.
Can I? Can I?
That's the one.
Really?
That's the one. How are you then?
I'm good, David. I just finished teaching for 8 hours, so
All right.
well,
You're well knackered then.
yeah, I am a bit, yes, but it's. I'm really glad to see you. I was really looking forward from the first period today to this moment. So I'm going to save the accolades and introduction. Your credentials for later, because I assume most of my viewers know who you are. So if you don't mind, we will get to it straight away. So welcome to Holland. What's the first, Dave? What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of the Netherlands?
1968, playing for Coventry City Football Club. Coming to the Netherlands to play a tournament in Amsterdam and The Hague, and loving the place, and being introduced for the first time to the glories of chips with mayonnaise, which I'd never even thought of before. When I was growing up, no, tomato sauce, mate, on chips. And then I'm walking down the canal one night with some of the other young players, and saw this this stall where they had mayonnaise on your chips, and I thought, well, that's strange, and it was amazing, and I still have mayonnaise on my chips all these years later.
Really? Because I visited England twice, and I noticed that the English put vinegar on their chips. I thought it was really ridiculous. It tastes like, well, it has no equal.
Putting what on the chips?
Vinegar.
Vinegar, yeah. Salt and vinegar from the chip shop, yeah. It's got a bit out of fashion now. Really? When I was a kid, it was all, you used to go to the chip shop, and you got the chips and the fish and stuff, and it was wrapped in a piece of, kind of semi-okay paper. And the rest of it was wrapped in old newspapers, keep it warm. And yeah, salt and vinegar was the thing then, yeah. But I think it's gone out of fashion now. I don't eat a lot of chips now, obviously, but.
Did you ever play against any famous Dutch football players?
I don't know. They were all young. I remember we played tournaments against Ajax, and is that the club one of the clubs we played at, who held the tournament, was ADO.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is 60s.
60s.
And yeah, we used to play against quite a few other English professional clubs, and right across from Europe, Spain and all of them. So yeah, it was good. But I don't remember. I don't think I played against Johan Cruyff somehow.
Yeah. Well, we are going to talk about your latest book and about education. So I was wondering, David, what are your earliest memories when it comes to your own education? Maybe primary school or kindergarten. How far back can you go?
Oh, I think my earliest memory in any kind of school was in a preschool, what we call preschool today. And I remember some lady was sitting on the side of the kind of bed that put you to sleep in the afternoon, I think. I was only a little kid. I mean, not much more than a baby. And I remember thinking, I wish you'd get a bum off this, because I'm being crushed, here. So that was a very vague memory I had. That would have been in Leicester, where I grew up. But, I've just published another book called The Trap, which is as deeper in the rabbit hole than I've ever gone so far. And I do a bit of background biography in the first 3 chapters. And I look back at my school days with affection, actually. I didn't start that well, because I went to school on the first day, and I was just about 5 years old. And I thought, I don't fancy this at all. I'm going home. So I went home. I ran home at lunchtime. Told my mother I wasn't going back because it wasn't very nice. And then the nightmare, she told me I've got to go back. But I didn't like school very much in the, kind of infant days. But as I progressed through, and particularly in a secondary school I went to in Leicester called Crown Hills, where the teaching staff were brilliant. And although, even then the curriculum was pushing you in a certain area of perception. But compared with today, I mean, today is just extraordinary. I feel sorry for the kids of today, because schools are not places of learning anymore, overwhelmingly. They're places of perceptual programming. And,
we will get to the programming part.
Say again?
But you didn't realize it back then that you were being programmed, were you?
Well, not programmed in the sense of today, because I wasn't being, but being guided, of course, by the curriculum, not necessarily the teachers so much in those days, but guided by the curriculum into certain perceptions of what is right and wrong, and what is real and not real, what took place in history and what didn't, and all that. But it wasn't like it is today. And I was a rebel all my life. At school, I was a rebel. I didn't accept things because I was told that this is how it is. I wanted to know how they knew that it was like they told me it was. So I was pushing back on the programming, and it's like you get told something, whether it's about history or anything, reality, not that you've got into that much, and you're supposed to just accept it and not push back on it, and not say, well, actually, how do you know that? But that's what I did. And so I was not someone who just like a sponge took it in. And I never took a major exam in my life. I left school at 15, which you could in those days in England. And so I never took any of these exams that they take at the end of their school life. And I've done all my learning in my time on my terms. So I never read a book from start to finish till I was in my 20s. They said at school, you read these books for your exams. Well, I never read it. They never engaged me. I wasn't something I wanted to do. And then once my head exploded in 1990 and my new life began, I was reading insatiably. I mean, I would read a book, put it down, pick up another, and away we go. Put it down, finish, start another one. And this went on for years and years and years. And I managed, therefore, to do my learning on my terms while not taking that much pre-perception with me from school. And certainly not from university. I mean, the nearest I got to university was playing for Oxford United for 3 months, So I didn't have that this is how it is, to then have to delete and see that actually I was being misled, because I didn't really take much notice in the first place, So that was a good thing when I look back.
I think so, yeah. But then you have to send your own kids to school, and did you realize it back then?
Well, what I said to my kids was, you go to school, they want to be with their mates and stuff, play for the school football team. That's the reason I went to school, actually. The real motivation was play for the school football team, be with my mates. But I always said to them, just because the teacher tells you something doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean you have to accept it. It doesn't mean you can't question it. So they also came through school pretty much unscathed in terms of their perception of everything. My son Gareth, who now works for Iconic and does shows here, is a very bright man, and he got E's in his exams, right? Because he was probably less interested in school than I was. And he has too done all his learning since he left school. He's done his learning like I have through experience of life. Life is the great teacher, the language of life. If you can understand the language of life and see how it's talking to you, is an amazing teacher. And so, you know, my kids weren't really touched by it either. And, you know, you can be, but today, if you're going to go to school, then you've got to have a fierce determination to defend your own uniqueness and defend your own right to question and your own right to come to your own unique conclusion. Because the pressure today not to do that is absolutely massive. And, you know, not just on the students and the kids, but on the teaching staff. And the pressure on them to teach in a certain way. We had an interview last week on one of the iconic shows with a teacher from Norfolk in England who resigned in the end because he could no longer be what he realized he'd become, which was a programmer of the child's perception. He wasn't there to teach them how to think and therefore conclude their own perception. He was there to tell them what to think. And, you know, when you get some perspective in this and you realize, you know, on the basis of what the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates is supposed to have said, wisdom is knowing how little we know. I've always lived my life, certainly in the last 32 years, on that basis. The one thing we know for sure, for absolute certainty, is we don't know it all. And another thing we know with absolute certainty is that what we think we know is a fraction, a tiny fraction, a laughable fraction of what there is to know. So when you're teaching any subject in an absolute way, this is how it is, and anyone that questions it is either going to be censored or sent to the head teacher, then you're in a position of frankly, stupidity and an arrogance that beggars belief. Because whatever we know, there's always vastly more to know. So putting in front of young people options and explanations of the options and making it clear that these are not the only options. So come to your own conclusions. If you see it a different way, well, you go with that. You're teaching them that there are other ways to see the world, and not just that which the system via schools and universities tell people to see it. And you see, what we're looking at now, which is why it's so vastly more extreme than it was when I went to school, is that we are not only making it difficult for people to speak their own truth if it's different from the official narrative, we are giving them sanctions, anything from losing their job to being vilified on social media. And we are increasingly censoring any debate worth the name because we prevent people from challenging the official narrative. Now, that is tyranny. And so schools and universities, without exceptions, and certainly with exceptions among the teaching staff who try to push back on this, though that's not the majority, schools and universities have become tyrannies. Tyrannies that now not only say you must believe what we tell you, but you must have a face mask on that's going to damage you psychologically. It's going to damage your health. You're going to be breathing in carbon dioxide, the gas of life, by the way, without which we'd all be dead in terms of the natural world. But humans are trying to expel carbon dioxide, not breathe it back in again. And you cannot attend university, for instance, unless you have a fake vaccine that does not fulfill any previous criteria of a vaccine, and which has caused enormous amounts of death and devastation to health the world over. Now, if that's not a definition of tyranny, then I don't know what is. And that's only on the level of the, you know, if you like, the physical level. You will have this or else. But on the psychological level, they are psychological tyrannies. What we're looking at, both in the education sphere and in society in general, is something I've been warning about for decades, which is psychological fascism, which is the imposition of not only what you are allowed to say, but increasingly what even you're allowed to think. And, you know, it creeps up on you if you're not careful.
Yeah, you mentioned the whole woke culture in your book, huh? Which touches on education as well, a lot actually.
Well, massively. I mean, you know, people, if they just looked at the flashing red lights that are all around us. For instance, do you believe that multi-billionaires could give a damn about the welfare of the public and the welfare of children? They couldn't give a damn. They are using their money all across the world to devastate the lives of children and the population.
How?
Bill Gates, I rest my case. Well, just look at the impact of his funded vaccination campaigns around the world, in Africa and in Asia. So the idea that Bill Gates, and I pick him as an example, or George Soros in America, or Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, could give a damn about the welfare of the public is absolutely ridiculous. So why are these people funding woke organizations? What's the benefit? Who benefits from that? They should ask why the man who has been at the forefront of pushing this fake vaccination on the world, Bill Gates, is also at the forefront of pushing the climate change hoax on the world, both of which are being used as an excuse to transform human society and dismantle the world and society as we've known it, not least through the impact on energy prices, the impact on food production, and so on. So why would people who couldn't give a damn about the population care about the population? Well, they couldn't. So therefore, there's a benefit. There's a benefit in why they do what they do. Does anyone think that George Soros could give a damn about people in Africa and the Middle East and where they go in terms of where they migrate? He couldn't give a damn. But he's funding endless organizations, both in Europe and the Middle East and in Central and South America and up to the southern border, to promote the vast movement of people out of the Middle East and Africa, Asia into Europe, and the same into America from the South. Now, he doesn't give a damn about those people. So what's the benefit? Then you say, why is George Soros funding Black Lives Matter? Does anyone think Black Lives Matter to George Soros? He couldn't give a damn. He's destroying Black communities in America, who are some of the poorest, by funding district attorneys into office who then refuse to prosecute crime. And so there's devastation going on in these communities now all across America. It's always the poor that feel it. Mm. So then you ask, well, why is he doing it then? Because there is an agenda to dismantle what we call Western society. And that's why he wants massive movements of people into the West. That's why he wants crime and fear to be rampant in the cities, because it's dismantling Western society. And why is he funding Black Lives Matter? Because if you're targeting a vast population and you at the core are very small, what you have to do is divide the target population and set it at war with itself. So instead of speaking the language we should be speaking, I would suggest, of we're all one consciousness and the body, the color and nature of the body is irrelevant. It's just a vehicle for consciousness to experience this reality. And therefore we're all aspects of the same whole. That brings people together. That brings people together in a unity. But
that's the answer.
If you're dividing society by saying this color body bad, this color body good, etc., then you are going to divide the target population, which is going to give you the ability to rule. And that's what that's all about.
That's the answer. That's chapter 17. You talk about the answer and about labeling people. You are not your labels. The answer is actually quite simple. But to come up with solutions against these very, very mighty people, what can you do as a simple teacher? What can I do? What can you do, David?
Well, you can do your best to communicate information that normally people wouldn't receive. And you know, I would say this: these people are not powerful. They're not. They are not powerful. How can you be a relative handful and be more powerful than 8 billion people? You can't. What you do, and what they're very skillful at, is manipulating the mass of the population to give their power to them. And that's what's going on all the time. People are giving their power to authority, and they're doing it in two major ways, many others too, but two major ways. One is this childlike belief that authority knows best. Because someone has passed lots of exams and is called a professor or something, or this scientist guy has got a fancy title, or this government guy has got a fancy title. Therefore, that equates with them knowing what they're doing. No, it doesn't. I'll tell you, I've lived in this world for 70 years, and a title gives you nothing except a title. There are people I have met who are big, fancy academics and scientists who I wouldn't trust to run a whelk stall or a herring stall on an Amsterdam street. They are clueless. They know nothing about what they're talking about. I left school at 15, and I've been saying now for decades, the Big Bang, the whole basis of scientific orthodoxy is a nonsense. It makes no sense. And now we're starting to get these pictures coming back from this James Webb Space Telescope that is much more sensitive in many areas than the Hubble telescope. And as one headline said in a scientific journal, panic, because what these images are challenging right at the fundamental level is the Big Bang is a load of old nonsense. It never happened. So if we go back to education, look at all the generations after generation after generation that have been told the Big Bang is real. Just that example. When all it is an assumption. And you know, it's so obvious when you look at what we call science, that you have an assumption, And the assumption is then repeated and repeated and repeated until it becomes, and everyone knows that, mate. And suddenly, what, everyone knows that. I'll give you a quick example of that, which is very relevant to recent events, actually. They came up with this idea that people were getting AIDS. And AIDS is what? It's a damaged immune system, which means you don't die of AIDS. No one dies of AIDS. They die of AIDS-related diseases. Diseases that they say the damaged immune system has allowed to happen that it wouldn't normally allow to happen. Okay. And then a couple of guys came out and said, so scientists, AIDS is caused by a virus called HIV. One was called Gallo in America, who was a close associate of Fauci, one of the biggest mass murderers in human history, actually, if you look at his background and just look at the book of Robert Kennedy Jr., yes. The real Anthony Fauci. And so they never had a peer-reviewed response to that claim. They just said it. As someone described it, it was science by press conference. And some years later, after this multi-billion, probably trillion-dollar industry called AIDS had manifested, there was a guy called Kerry Mullis, who was an American biochemist, who won the Nobel Prize for developing a test called the PCR. Kerry Mullis pointed out before he died, just before the COVID hoax was played, he pointed out that his test does not test for an infectious virus. It cannot tell you if you're sick. It's testing for something else, not related to that. Anyway, he tells the story in his book, Dancing Naked in the Minefield, I think he called it, I've got it at home, how he was doing a paper on the PCR test, and as part of what he was writing, he wanted a reference to scientific paper that said that HIV causes AIDS, okay? So he went to a virologist at the university where he was working, the lab where he's working, and he asked him, and what came back from the virologist was the classic. He said, oh, you don't need a reference, he said. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows HIV causes AIDS. Okay. So he said, well, I want a reference. And he tried and he tried and he tried, and he never found one. And then he found himself at a conference with the French guy with Gallo, who was given the credit for discovering that HIV causes AIDS. And he asked him for a reference, and he couldn't give him one, because it doesn't exist. And so what you've got with HIV is you test someone with a test not testing for it, the PCR test. And if you test positive, you're then said to have be HIV positive and thus have a wonderful chance of getting AIDS. You're then put on medication, and the medication kills you. And they call your death AIDS. And one of the people massively, well, one of the people at the forefront of the AIDS slaughter, that's what it was Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci promoted a drug called AZT, which was a chemotherapy drug deemed so toxic, it was taken out of use for chemotherapy. So imagine how toxic it must be. And then when the AIDS scam was played, it came off the shelf, and Fauci promoted it as a treatment for AIDS. So people tested positive for HIV with a test not testing for it. They're perfectly healthy. They have no symptoms of anything. They're put on AZT. And what do chemotherapy drugs do? They destroy your immune system. And so you die of an AIDS-related disease because your immune system's shot, and they say you've died of AIDS, and you go on the figures. And you'll remember a great lead singer of Queen, Freddie Mercury.
Yes. He
tested positive for HIV, went on Fauci's AZT, and died. Magic Johnson, in the relatively the same period, early 90s, a very famous basketball player, was going to get married. So he had an HIV test and it was positive, and he was put on AZT. Had no symptoms, nothing wrong with it. Put in on AZT, and he got very sick very quickly, and he came off it. Magic Johnson's still alive today. And so if you are not taught how to think, and if you just naively, unquestioningly, in that childlike way, just accept that what authority tells you must be true because these people know what they're doing. I tell you, they don't. And some of them do know that they're doing very, very sinister, satanic things and don't give a damn about it at the same time. And so you've got this group in society that just believe what they're told without question. And then you've got another group that don't want to do what authority tells them, but they're too frightened not to do what they're told. And those two groups, they're responsible for every tyranny in history. And so if you're talking about an answer, you can look for solutions which usually lead to more problems, or you can look for the cause of the problem. And the cause of the problem that allows tyranny to manifest, because the tyrants almost every time number very few people at the core, as they do globally now, then we stop unquestioningly believing what authority tells us. And we grow a backbone and we grow a pair. And when we believe something's wrong and it's not something we should do or want to do, we don't do it. No is the most powerful way to dismantle tyrannies, non-cooperation. Because Biden, not that he knows what he's saying, but his handlers put it that way, Biden and Macron and Rutte and the just past Johnson and all these people, Ardern, Trudeau, they say this is going to happen. We've decided. Okay, well, in Britain, there's 60-odd million people. So what if a great chunk of those people say we're not doing it? It can't happen. It's unenforceable. But these two groups, I believe what the government tells me, so I'll do it. And I don't want to do it, but I'm too frightened not to do it. Those two groups give power to these tyrants and frontmen for tyrants like Trudeau and the crowd I've just described and many others. And so if we're going to look for the cause of the problem, because a problem manifests because something causes it. You find a solution to it, well, that will lead to another problem, inevitably. If you move the cause, the problem must disappear. Cause and effect, literally. And that's how we remove the cause. And that means people have got to take control of their minds back, group one. And people have got to take control of their backbone back, group two. And then we'll bring this to an end. But I tell you, until that happens in big enough numbers, it won't be brought to an end because the cause will still be there.
But you have been communicating this message for decades. Have you seen any positive effects in the right direction, or are we
phenomenal? Phenomenal. Yeah. You know, I do understand why people who kind of come into this arena more recently, why they look at the world and they say, why aren't more people waking up, right? Well, they should have been with me in 1990, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, and on and on and on and on and on. When it was like banging your head against a wall with nails in it. And you thought, what's the point? That something drives you on and drives you on, and you keep doing it, you keep doing it, you keep doing it. And there were different points. The waters started to break in a relatively smaller way. 9/11 was a water breaking moment. So was weapons of mass destruction that weren't in Iraq, and so on and so forth. And more people began to wake up to it. And what has happened in the COVID era, I said when it started, when all the lockdowns started and the fascism started, that what's happened is these people have walked out of the shadows, at least their agents have, and they've entered the room and they've heard the door click behind them, because now their game is on public display. And when you connect the dots, when you know what the outcome is meant to be, you know the outcome and you'll see the journey. And increasing numbers of people do, they realize that COVID and lockdown was only stage one. That what's happening in Ukraine is another stage, which is leading to food shortages, breaking up of the food chain, of the food supply chain, the massive increase in fuel prices and energy prices in general. All these things are connected, and people are starting to get the way the game is working. And it's fantastic for me, because I spent most of the 90s, if not all the 90s and beyond, being laughed at. I mean, people point at me in the street laughing. Now, I walk down the street and I get stopped by people asking me to discuss what's going on. And they say to me, I think this is happening because of this, or I think this is happening because of that. And invariably, they're right. People are getting more streetwise. And, you know, during the COVID lockdown periods, we were getting hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of London who overwhelmingly have never been on a protest march in their life, but they could start to see where this was going and what the bigger picture of this world really is and where we're being directed. So when you've been doing it for as long as I have, you look around you now and it's dreamland, really. The number of people who can see it, not necessarily see it all, but can see enough to realize that the world is not controlled by people they thought it was. And the next stage is what we're talking about now. It's going from seeing it and observing it to ceasing to cooperate with it, because people are frightened of authority. You know, people just watching this will experience it. You get a letter from the local government or something. You get a letter from the government. You get a letter from the tax people. Just observe what happens to your body and your mind when that happens. You go into fear immediately, or there's an official envelope you've not even opened, but you can see it's from the government. You go into fear. This has become a reflex action, and it's got to stop, because these people have no power, only the power we give to them. That's the illusion.
So what are your predictions?
We give them power in the form of acquiescence. And then they recycle it back against us in a form of imposition. But the imposition can only be imposed because of the acquiescence, right? It's a feedback loop. We just need to break it.
So winter is coming. What are your predictions for this winter? Will we be wearing mouth masks again? When is it enough? Because we had 2 lockdowns this year before, and my predictions are that this winter is going to be the same all over again.
Well, again, you come back to know the outcome and you'll see the journey. What do they want? They want a population in every country totally dependent for survival on governments which are nothing more than fronts for this global cult that I talk about, which is actually driving all this and coordinating all this globally. So dependency, what do you need to survive? Food. Okay, so if you cared about the population at a time when the food supply chain is breaking down, would you do what Rutte, a man completely owned by the World Economic Forum to his DNA, would you do what he's doing to Dutch farmers with the impact that would have on food supply? No, you wouldn't do that. You would do the opposite. You would be doing everything you can to increase the supply of food. And if you got more, as in the Netherlands, you absolutely have up to this point, than the population needs, then you can export it to other people. That's what you would be doing. You would not be seeking to destroy it. And he's destroying it because, and it's happening around the world too, but the most obvious example is Rutte and the Netherlands at the moment, because that's going to create dependency. So then you look at lockdown, like I said earlier, stage one. Who did they target? They targeted small and medium-sized businesses, even some big businesses that are not connected to this cult. While the massive global cult corporations, Amazon, Facebook, and all these others, they had a fantastic time financially, while everyone else was suffering. Because if you want to create dependency, financial dependency, then what you have to do is destroy independent access to income. Because while you have an independent income, either through an independent business or you work for an independent business, any few people at the center cannot impact upon your life. What you have to create is dependency. So enormous numbers of businesses worldwide have gone under, with many more coming because of the stage two, which is the energy prices and the energy costs, because they want to destroy independent access to income. And this is why I've been predicting for so long that the plan is to introduce a guaranteed income. Because what the plan is you destroy the livelihoods of the people and you make them dependent. How are we going to eat? How are we going to keep warm? And you come forward and you say, well, it's terrible what's gone on, even though we've created it. So we're going to produce this guaranteed income. It will be a pittance, and you'll only get it if you obey the government and don't rock the boat. And, you know, I said a long time ago that China is the blueprint. Said so many times over the years, if you want to see the West tomorrow, look at China today, or what's planned for the West tomorrow anyway. And so you had this Mao revolution, which this cult was behind, because they wanted to create a isolated society, fiercely controlled, in which without any pushback, they could incubate and bring forth a system of human control, not least through technology, that could then be exported across the world once it had been perfected. And that's what's happening now. Since the COVID hoax was played out of China, the Chinese system has increasingly become more and more obvious in the West. And where in China they have this social credit system, where if you act and behave in ways that suit the government, you get credits, and if you don't, you get them taken away. And if you lose enough credits, you can't fly, you can't go on a train, you can't take part in society. The Western version of that is the vaccine passport. And if people think that's gone away, they're in for a shock, because it hasn't. It's just a matter of how they can manipulate it into place. And the vaccine passport will be very much along the lines of what we saw before. Unless you get fake vaccinated, you can't do A, B, C, and D, and you can't take part in society. Now, they tried to push that through in the COVID lockdown era and the COVID fake vaccine era, but they got enough pushback that they had to pull back and regroup. And they're going to come again. They'll come again. More hoaxes, more lies, more problems created that they can say the solution is the passport. But it just shows you, you know, in Britain, they said that everyone who works for the National Health Service has to get fake vaccinated, otherwise they're going to lose their job. And that was it. And they did it with care home workers. And a lot of care home workers got the fake vaccine, a lot to their regret, because they didn't want to lose their job. But when it came to the point of sacking national health workers, nurses, doctors, etc., they realized that there were so many who'd said, we're not having it, that they couldn't introduce it because the National Health Service, rubbish as it is, would have absolutely collapsed if they had. So they withdrew the planned mandate. And they withdrew it not because they wanted to, but because enough people said no. And if enough care workers had have said no, they wouldn't have got it through then either. And so they have not got as much out of the COVID hoax as they wanted to. They've got a lot. They've not got anything like as much as they wanted, but they're going to keep coming back. And that's why I say, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. If you know what the outcome is, you can see the journey towards that outcome every day. If you don't know the outcome, then the events suddenly take on the appearance of being random. But you know what they want. So if they haven't got it this time, you know they're going to come back with other excuses and reasons to get what they want. So, you know, people say to me, how have you predicted the future? I haven't. I've said this is what the plan is. And if enough people don't push back on it and that plan unfolds, it becomes the future. But as we've seen with the example I've just given, and there are others, if we simply say, no, we're not doing it, then it can't happen.
And what does it take for this obsolete education system I'm part of to collapse? Must the students say, no, we're not going to school anymore? Enough is enough.
Well, there's two things they can do. They can say that. My daughter made the decision many years ago that her children weren't going to school, and they are super intelligent kids now, learning a trade in college of their choosing that they want to do, but they didn't go to school every day, and they're super intelligent because we have got this connection in people's minds between exam passes and intelligence. They're not the same thing. There is taught intelligence, which is not intelligence at all. It's just repeating what you've been told. And then there's innate intelligence, which comes from within, and you make the decisions on what you perceive and what you believe, and you don't take them off the shelf from some teacher or academic or scientist or doctor. So you can say, no, not going to school. Or you can go to school and just question the hell out of them until they don't know where they're coming from. Because, you know, so many, you look at the system and the way it works. You come out of the womb and the programming starts with your parents because they've been through what you're about to go through. You then, at a very early age, ludicrously early age, 4 now, even earlier, go to school. You've only just come into the world. And yet you're sitting at a desk and an authority figure is telling you what to believe, when you can go to the toilet, when you can talk, when you must be there, when you can leave, all of it, right at the start of your life. You're not just arrived there and it started. And then you go through your school, and if you go to university life, and the process continues of you being indoctrinated into the system. And some of these people who are indoctrinated, well, let's just go on to the next stage, and then I'll come back to that. You then leave school and you go into the world of work. And the people you meet there have simply been through what you've been through, only earlier. They basically see the world in pretty much the same way, and they see events in the same way. And so you've gone through school where you've just been indoctrinated over and over again with the same thing. Then you go into the world of work, and that's overwhelmingly, especially now with all the censorship, an echo chamber confirming that what you've been told is real is real. And like I say, a certain number of people who, as they go through this system, then decide they want to be academics and they want to be teachers. They may want to do it for the right reasons, but the system will make sure that they're not going to survive very long. And so they go off to teacher training college or wherever, and they get taught how to teach kids. Well, how to teach kids from the system's point of view. But the control, of course, is the curriculum. It's what they are taught. And, you know, I hear over the years, you know, over the decades, really, parents talking about, you know, we don't like the way our children are taught and all that stuff. But I very rarely hear anyone say, I'm not happy with what my children are being taught. Because you've got an official version of history, which I know from my own research over 32 years, is a nonsense, most of it. It didn't happen like that at all. But it becomes the perception that that's how it was of the great majority of the population, because that's all they've ever heard. And what you've got underpinning the education system, the indoctrination system, is the mainstream media. The mainstream media is basically confirming all the time that what you were told is real in school is real. And so what they're doing now is that they are putting a ring fence around that perception, what I call the postage stamp consensus of reality, through censorship. So other people can't get in there to challenge the official narrative. And so if you look at the manipulation of the mass of the population, it's not done physically, it's done psychologically. And this is why the education, control of the education system and the media is so vital, and social media and Silicon Valley. You need to control access to the mind. Because if you can do that, you can indoctrinate perception. You can hijack perception. If you hijack perception, you're hijacking behavior. People behave as they do because they perceive as they do. You know, people in the spring of 2020 meekly went under lockdown, house arrest, because they thought there was a deadly virus. Got your perception, got your behavior. So the whole thing is a psychological game to control the perceptions of the population and thus the behavior of the population. And that's why they are desperate to destroy the alternative media. Because the alternative media, and I don't agree with everything it says, they won't agree with everything I say. That's as it should be. But what it's doing is saying, hey, there is another way of looking at this, you know. It's not the only way is not only what the government says or authority says or the media says or, you know, the school says, the university says. There is another way of looking at it. And when you're confident that your version of events or reality is supportable by the evidence and is credible, you don't care what other people say about it or how they challenge it. You don't care about debating it because you're confident in what you're saying. The mentality that censors is that A, is not confident that what he's saying is credible, and B, even worse, it bloody knows what it's saying is not true. But it does also know that if open debate took place, its position would get exposed and demolished. So what do? You can't win the debate, you don't have it. And that's what the censorship's all about. And what they've done, you mentioned the woke, they have completely inverted, because that's how they work. Everything's inversion, everything's upside down. It's the way this cult works. It's the way Satanists work. It's why Satanists have inverted symbols, the inverted pentagram, the inverted cross. Everything is inverted. This is why the people promoting this lie all the time, because what is a lie? It's an inversion of the truth. It's all inversion. But Biden just made a speech with his blood red background in Philadelphia, in which he was talking about a group of American people being this, that, and the other. And it was everything he was and everything his administration has done since he took office. It was a complete inversion. This is how they work. So you are looking at a situation where people need to take what they're told and invert it. And I tell you from experience of all these decades, they'll be far, far closer to the truth when they do that than ever there will be by believing that what they're being told is true. So it's a psychological game, and we have to take control of our minds back because we've given them away. We've given them away through unquestioning acquiescence, and we've given them away through fear of not acquiescing. And those two states of being have created the situation we're in now.
Imagine you were king for one day, or not, and you had to design your own iconic college for, your vision of education. What does good education look like through your eyes, through your lenses?
Well, I'm a great believer in letting young people follow their passion, follow what they love, do what they love doing. And I talk about my grandchildren there, my daughter's grandchildren. They followed their passion. They did what they chose to do. They researched what they chose to research. And in researching their passion and getting more and more knowledge, they learn how to write, they learn numbers, they learn English, they learn all these things, but not as a focus. Because, look at it. Oh, God, look at it. You come into the world, and then in all your formative years, all your wonder about the world is focused. And I remember this, it happened in my time as well. Moving from this class, now it's maths. And then now it's English. Oh, now it's geography. And all day you're getting this stuff in your head. And what it's doing is overwhelmingly, you might have virtually, like I did, certain subjects that you do, love to explore. But overwhelmingly, it's boring you to tears. And you just, all you're doing is you're taking his stuff in, trying to remember it so you can regurgitate it on the exam paper so you pass your exams. And what the exam is saying is, okay, tell us what we've told you is true and you will pass, right? My son, Jamie, was told by his science teacher that if he said in his exam, which is what he believed, that human-caused global warming is unsustainable as a claim, simply cannot be sustained by the evidence, he will not pass his exam. So say what they want you to hear, what they've told you is true, that human-caused global warming is real, and you'll pass your exam. Say it isn't, put some supporting evidence for it, you won't pass. This is what it is. It's about exam passes, exam passes, exam passes. And so for me, let young people pursue their passion and everything will come from it. I left school at 15 and I knew next to bugger all because I just weren't bothered. I never took any major exams because I didn't want to. I left to play football, professional football. But even if I hadn't, I still wouldn't have done it. And yet, I've now written 26 books, some of which are very, very thick, because it's this relationship between conventional official education and intelligence. This is the big problem, mate. It really is. It's this association that one means the other that has people believing what an academic says because he's an academic, has scientist says because he's a scientist. And some Fauci government health quote expert, I won't say what he really is to a family audience, must know what he's talking about. This association, and you get this association too in the same way. I weren't very good at school. I'm not very bright, really, right? Mm-hmm. And yet you have a chat with a person who says that, and you realize they are incredibly bright. They're very perceptive. They see things that others don't see. They have innate intelligence to work it out themselves, but they have this perception of themselves that they're not very bright and not as bright as others because they didn't do very well at school. Well, neither did I. You don't need to. We have a lifetime to learn. It doesn't have to be concertinaed in the first years of your life. It doesn't. So why is it? Because it's not about education. It's about programming perception, which even if you try, can take a lifetime to unravel, but overwhelmingly will take you through life with your perceptions in a ball and chain, coming from those early years of indoctrination. And so I would have a teaching profession that was encouraging young people to think, to work it out for themselves. Obviously, yes, well, this is what these people say, this is what these people say, this is what these people say, this is what these people say. So, but you are unique. You can have your own unique spin on this. So you decide what you want to believe.
How do you facilitate that as a society? You know, all these kids have different wishes. They're all unique in their own way.
Yeah.
How do you make programs around that? Who has the time to teach all these kids with all their different talents?
But you don't have to teach them. You have to get them to teach themselves. That's the point. When you pursue your passion, I mean, I left school, right, at 15. My spelling was appalling. My maths was appalling, all of it. But I taught myself. Now, if I can teach myself in my teenage 20s years and beyond, then I could teach myself when I'm 10, 11, 12, 14, 15. What we need is guidance. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have someone standing at the front of the class all the time saying, this is how it is, write this down. It's like, this is what the official story is, basically. This is what they say about this historical event. But maybe you want to research it yourself and then come back and say what you think happened. And then let's have a debate in the class. I mean, how many classes are, this is how it is, write it down, okay, bell's gone, see you next week or whenever. Instead of getting the class engaged and saying, well, look, this is the official story of this event. This is the official story of what happened. This is the official story of reality. It's the official story of whatever. Mm-hmm. What do we think? And people then are starting knocking it around. And Mark said, well, God, I've never thought of that. I never thought of that. Well, what about that? And you're getting people to start to fire off each other and to fire off themselves because they have the space and the encouragement to do so. Instead of, no, we're not debating, Johnny, we're not doing this. Just write it down and then remember it for your exams. And this is why so many people go to school and don't like it. They don't like it because it's alien to them. You get people in a situation where their opinion, their view is considered valid. Yeah, but what is happening? Any view, even in the classroom, that is not within the parameters of the official narrative is no longer not only not valid, it's punishable. It's because the walls are moving in on allowed perception. They're moving in straight out of Orwell's 1984. It's fewer and fewer things, narrower and narrower perceptions that are allowed, and all the things that we're not allowed to talk about, not allowed to have an opinion about, are getting larger and larger and larger as they are picked off by this incessant, this is what you're allowed to say and allowed to think and nothing else. And it's something that it's continuing to move. The number of things we can say and have an opinion about is getting smaller and smaller all the time. And I said decades ago now that the plan was to reach a point eventually where no one will ever see or hear anything that isn't sanctioned by the authorities. And that's where we're heading, and we're heading faster and faster in that. And, you know, I look at the young and I think, if you're not going to be rebellious when you're young, when are you going to start? And I see rebellion among the young fast disappearing. Mm-hmm. Because what the system has done, this is what the system has done. It has hijacked the sense of rebellion. So the people and the young and the wokers and the climate activists who, and the schools indoctrinating the climate official narrative is extraordinary now. They believe they are anti-system. They are saying to government, we demand that you do this. What they don't realize is that which is behind government wants exactly what they're demanding. If you look at the energy situation now, they're talking about, oh, it's caused by Ukraine. But actually, the situation we're in now in terms of energy supply has been systematically achieved on a stepping stone basis by more and more deletion of fossil fuel sources of energy. That's where it's come from. And if you've not got access to cheap enough energy, then you are creating a disaster for particularly the poor. You are going to dismantle society. You're going to dismantle the way society operates. You're going to destroy vast numbers of businesses. That's what's coming. And it's all for the benefit of this tiny clique that want exactly that to happen, as I've been saying for 30 years. But those that are demanding it believe they are anti-establishment when they're doing everything the establishment wants. Yeah. And so you've seen this, as I was going to say earlier, this hijacking of the left, the progressives, as they call them in America, so that the left has become the right. When I was growing up in Leicester in England in the 60s, I came from my father, my mother voted for the Labour Party, which was a very different Labour Party then to what it is now. Still not brilliant, but better than it is now, which wouldn't be difficult. And those of us who were of that mentality, we were challenging what was then not billionaires, but millionaires, and their imposition on society, the injustice in society. We're challenging wars and the reasons for wars, all those things.
Yeah.
Now, the left, because of the woke hijack, has shifted. So instead of challenging what are now billionaires, the woke mentality is in bed with billionaires. As long as George Soros funds Black Lives Matter, he must be a good guy. Never mind the ulterior motive for doing it. And so what we've reached is a point where, as long as the billionaires and the dictators of society speak the language of woke, as long as the corporations speak the language of woke, then they're on our side. And those on the other side who are challenging that, who are challenging the imposition of corporations and billionaires on society and all the injustice, unfairness, and deletion of freedom that entails, they're now considered the far right. They're now considered the bad guys, when basically what they're saying is what the old left used to say. There's been a complete transformation.
Yeah, you talk about
the political landscape.
You talk about Greta Thunberg as well in your book, and she's an icon when it comes to, opposing the billionaires and the oligarchs. But you say there's a different story to it when it comes to Greta Thunberg, talking about youth.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the background to her, what they were looking for was a figure, a focal point figure that would be an icon for the young, to gather the young in demanding the very things the billionaires and the cult want to transform human society on the basis of saving the planet. Now she's challenging the establishment. Who put her on the public display for the first time and got her up to that global icon of the young that she became? The World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. That's where she first appeared massively on the public stage. Then she came the next year. Then Rothschild connected people sailed her across the Atlantic and all flew back on a plane, by the way, so she could speak at the UN. Now, you don't get to speak at the UN and the World Economic Forum if you are anti-system. You get to do it if you've been manipulated to promote an agenda that the system wants, that the cult wants. That's what's happened. And she reached a point, and this is how the cult works, where she became detrimental. She wasn't a good sell anymore. And you'll see how she's disappeared into the background, and other promoters have come forward. They used her for that period mercilessly. And she had a kind of innate arrogance, if you like, and believed her own publicity. And was starting to lecture everybody and lecturing everybody on data that was completely nonsensical and unsupportable by the evidence. But then again, the people that lionized her didn't do the research either. I would say this to people: look at history. What have we learned from history? All history, all societies, all cultures, everywhere. Those in authority lie. Okay, they lie to us. That's what they do.
True.
So your starting point, if you're really interested in working out what's happening in the world, when authority says to you, this is how it is, and this is why something must be done, start from the premise they are lying. Then ask why they are lying, what's the outcome, who benefits from us believing the lies. And when you start from the premise that they are lying, you're then looking for evidence that they're not telling you the truth, because you pretty much know they're not. So how and why? And so then you start doing your own research. They've said this, let's see if that's backed up by the evidence. But if your first premise is authority is telling me the truth, then you're not going to do that research overwhelmingly. You're going to accept what is said, naively childlike. So if you take, when authority speaks, it's a lie. Now, why are they lying? What's in it for them, for me believing the lie? And what's the basis on what they're saying? Okay, well, let me research this and see if they are telling the truth for once in their life. They overwhelmingly won't be. And it's a different way of looking at it. You know, Biden opens his mouth, he's lying. He's reading someone else's words who's actually lying, but he's lying. And Johnson is lying. Rutte is lying. Rutte knows that he's not trying to destroy Dutch farming to save the world. He knows that. He's a liar. He's deeply corrupt, and he's owned by the World Economic Forum, which is owned by this global cult. When Rutte speaks, he's lying. You know when he's lying because his lips are moving. That's the premise to come from, because then you start to become far more resistant to having your perceptions hijacked, because your first premise is I'm being lied to, okay, because then your guard comes up.
But how do you get there? How do you get there?
Gotcha.
Because how do you get there? Because the education system has taught you otherwise. How do you get there at that particular point?
Right. Well, you know, people make different decisions, or we go on deeper and deeper into where we already are and where we're going. Because if we don't change, then what we are currently creating or allowed to be created must go on being created. It must be. It's that great line. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. It's a great line, and it's absolutely true. So people need to take their minds back and start to question and start to stop cooperating with their own enslavement. Then there's the next thing, the power of the mind. The power of the mind is infinitely more powerful than the manipulators of the mind. So you can take your mind back. More and more people are. And they take it back by, first of all, they're lying to me. How are they lying to me? What's the benefit of them lying to me? They ask these basic questions. They're taking their mind back. And it's, the programming is overwhelmingly subconscious. That's how they do it. They're looking to get you into your subconscious mind. So once they're there, what they put in filters through to the conscious mind. This is crucial. And at that point, you think you are having your own thoughts and you're coming to your own perceptions. But they've been put in at the subconscious level. The crucial thing is that it's done there, A, because you don't realize it's been done because it's subconscious. This is what subliminal stuff's all about. But also, when the subliminal becomes conscious, you think it's you. You think it's your thought and it's your perception. Because then you think you are thinking when actually external programming is thinking for you. What they don't want, desperately want, is for you to make the subliminal manipulation conscious. because once it's conscious, it loses all effect. And you can see that very clearly. I have used a picture in two of my books, and it's just a picture of 4 plants. And I say to them, people, there's a subliminal in there. See if you can see it. And they look, 95% or more can't see the subliminal. Because subliminal, what does it mean? Below threshold, below the threshold of the conscious mind. And then you point out where the subliminal is. And in this case, the white bits between the plants make the word sex. So you point it out. Once you've pointed it out, every time those people see that picture, every time, bar none, the subliminal is the first thing they see, when they couldn't see it a few seconds ago. The reason is you've taken the subliminal out of the subconscious and you put it into the conscious mind. And so if people will just research how this manipulation works and to what end, what they're doing, what people like me are doing, is taking that stuff that's subliminally happening in the unconscious, the manipulation, oh, it's all random when it's absolutely coldly calculated. Yeah. And it's making it conscious. And once that becomes conscious, the impact of the manipulation is over. And that's why so many people now are streetwise where they weren't before. So if we come back to, you know, what will happen in what we call the future, the one thing we do know, at least, is that compared with the spring of 2020, it's going to be a lot more difficult now. It's going to be a lot more difficult because what started to happen, and I've seen this, is certainly in Britain, is people within the system who were compartmentalized from why they were being told to do this and do that, have started to connect the dots and see actually what it was all about. And so you've got doctors and people that work for Pfizer, even at a high level, who've gone from it's all real to it's not real at all. And what's happened is they've become conscious of what they weren't conscious of before. And once it becomes conscious, it's so simple to see.
Yeah. That's what you say in the final chapter. You're talking about chapter 17 of your book, The Answer. It's so simple, but many people think it isn't. And the sentence that really resonated with me is in chapter 17. You say many gurus and spiritual teachers will tell you, often for their own benefits, between brackets, that the way to achieve such expansion of consciousness is also complex. We must embark on quests, fasting, meditation, yoga, and lots of communal rituals, endless workshops, and green tea. It's much more simple, you say.
Well, what I say is it's simply self-identity. Who do you think you are? If you think you are your human labels, I am a man, I am a woman, I am this race, this sexuality, that sexuality, then you will immediately perceive yourself in limited terms. You'll perceive yourself in terms of, I can't, it's not possible. And if you see yourself as little me, then little me is looking for bigger me's to tell it what to think. When you self-identify not with the labels of a human life, but those labels are simply experiences that you are having, and you are that which is having the experience. You are consciousness. The body is a vehicle to experience this reality briefly, but you are the consciousness that's having the experience. And you are a consciousness that's connected to all consciousness. Thus, you are limited only by your perception of the nature of who you are, what you are. If you believe you're little me, you'll live a little me life. And you'll look to authority to tell you what to do. you realize that you're all that is, has been, and ever can be, having a brief human experience, suddenly you are limited only by your perception of how unlimited you are, or you're only limited by the perception of how limited you are. Once you realize there is no limitation, and I go deeply into the nature of this illusory reality we call the physical world and the human world. If you, for instance, believe that this world is solid and physical, what does that say immediately? Limited. I can't, it's not possible. When you realize it's not, and it's all illusory, as I explain in the books, then you realize that you can change things by changing. In this latest book that's just come out called The Trap, I say this, the mind thinks it's in the body. It's not. The body is in the mind. All this is in the mind. And I can explain it in the books what I'm saying. All this is in the mind. This is in my mind. And therefore, if my mind is in a distorted, imbalanced, low vibrational, chaotic state, then my body will reflect that. And we call that dis-ease, disease, illness. And we go to a doctor. Or we go to a doctor who's been told that this world is physical and this is physical and there's nothing else beyond the physical, basically. And that the only way you're going to cure the physical is by doing something physical. Whereas when you realize the mind is in the body, or the body is in the mind rather, then the mind's the governor. What happens when you think that somehow you're in the body, the mind's in the body, is you fall for the trap that the body is the governor. So some doctor tells you you've got this, and the mind goes, oh God, I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die because I've got this. And the doctor says, I think you've got this long to live. You look at the data on how many people die within the prognosis of life that a doctor gives them. And there are many instances of people being told by the doctor that they have this disease and they're gonna die within this period, who, when they do die within that period, the post-mortem shows they didn't have what the doctor said they had. Their body has died because it believes that it is dying and is going to die. Why? Because the body's in the mind, not the other way around. And so when you realize that, you realize that what can go wrong in the body can go right. You can heal yourself by healing your mind, by healing your consciousness, by breaking out of these chaotic, schismatic distortions that come from experience and emotional trauma and all these things. They are going to reflect themselves in the body. But the mind is the governor of the body. Therefore, the mind can put it right. And so often, of course, not so often, all the time, the medical profession get in between the two. They get in between the mind and the body. And the mind has to go through doctors to get to the body. It doesn't. It can heal itself, but only if it understands the power it has to do that. Because most of the time, it doesn't think it can. It thinks what a doctor says is a death sentence, and that's it. And it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't. This world is a manifestation of mind, which means it's malleable, which means it's changeable by changing perception. People look at the world and they go, look at it, all this stuff going on in the world. And you say, well, okay, why is this stuff you don't like going on in the world? Well, it's where people behave. Yeah. So why do people behave like that? Well, it's because they perceive like this and they behave like that. So you imagine a world in which people's perceptions were different, that we weren't fighting each other for superiority, that we weren't kowtowing to authority just because it's got a fancy title. We weren't doing these things. And these are all mind things. Mind, perception changes, the world will be completely different. There would be no top-down hierarchy of imposition. There would be no wars. There'd be no conflict. There'd be no people trying to get far more than they could ever spend so that these people here have nothing to spend. It wouldn't be like that because the perception would change. What this world is, that's why I say it's all mind, is a manifestation of human collective perception. That's the world we have. You change that perception, you change the world. The reflection we call the world, which is of perception. That's where it's going on. And this cult knows that, which is why it's after perception. That's the bottom line of everything it does.
And education is an important part in that. So you just mentioned that you see the youth today are acquiescing more and more to the system, are less rebellious, are complying to teachers more and more. Do you have any hopes when it comes to this generation in schools right now?
Well, I think it's very difficult for them because, and that's why I say I feel sad for them, because they are subject to some of the greatest and most sophisticated perceptual programming there's ever been, not least now through technology. But the power of the mind is everything. You can take your power back. I've seen people who were completely mesmerized, completely woke, completely bought the whole lot, who don't anymore. It's possible to do that. But again, it's about personal responsibility. You know, you can put information out there, but people have got to make the choice, if they choose to do it, to act upon that and take their minds back and to question what they're being told. And not to feel embarrassed by the fact that they've been talking nonsense, thinking it was real, because the programming is very powerful and it's very potent. And when the academia is telling you something and the media is telling you something, and Silicon Valley is telling you something, and all your mates around you who've been subject to the same programming are confirming that something is correct, that's an enormous amount of confirmation that you're receiving that the nonsense is real. So people need to be kind to themselves and just say, well, actually, I have been subjected to this tidal wave of programming, but hey, I've sussed it. And when I see young people, and there are many of them who've been through this entire programming and it's not got them, they are really impressive people because they have not succumbed to what most people would succumb to. But it's in the end, it's about choosing to take the responsibility to take your mind back and stop giving it away. And you know what I said earlier about self-identity and self-identifying with being consciousness, infinite eternal consciousness on an eternal journey of experience. And the cult trying to put you in this little me box, which is basically the five senses only. They know what they're doing. They know the psychology. They know that what I've just said is true. So let's look at that from a topical point of view. What you're looking at now is the subdividing of the previous labels. I am a man, I am a woman, I am this race, this religion, whatever, to subdividing those into such minutiae of self-identity that this list of letters gets longer and longer and longer. LGBT, right? Gets longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, it does.
What that means is that people are being manipulated to self-define the I by the minutiae, even of their sexual preference. So, it's people say, you know, I am gay, I am this sexuality, I am this, I am that, I'm the other. And I see other people say, no, you're just human, right? Well, we're not human. We're consciousness having an experience called human. And what they are doing is subdividing that human experience into greater and greater minutiae of self-identities, so that we identify the I with smaller and smaller and smaller definitions. And with each one, you're getting further and further from that perception of I am consciousness having a human experience. That's what they're doing. And the more that you can create more and more self-identities, minutiae self-identities, the more fault lines you have to play self-identities off against each other. So now you've got the self-identity of the transgender, and I can explain that at length why that's going on, kind of going to war with women and lesbians and stuff. I mean, it's like it's all coming from this minutiae of self-identity, where people define the self by their sexual preference. They define the self by their religious preference, by their racial type, and they think they are they think they're doing what they believe is right, but they're being played like a violin. They really are, but actually not a violin. The string section they're being played by, and we come back again to this, what I talked about earlier, of believing you're anti-establishment when what you're doing is doing everything the establishment wants you to do. Divide and rule.
Let's end on a positive note. Would you like to address the kids in my class? They're 14, 15, 16 years old, and David Icke is giving them a message. What would it be like?
I would say, first of all, who are you? How are you going to go through life unless you have some idea who you are? And when they tell me who they think they are, I will ask them why they think that. And they will give me explanations that all come from what they've been told. You know, the world is a cacophony of repetition, of people repeating what others have told them. So I would say, how about perceiving that you are consciousness? You are just pure consciousness. You are the ability to perceive, the ability to observe, and the ability to think and conclude. That's who you are. And everything else, what you call your body, what you call this world, are simply experiences of that consciousness. Start from that perspective. And then ask yourself where your perceptions of the world come from. Why do you think what you think? Why do you believe what you do? Why do you act like you do? Why do you self-identify as you do? And where did that come from? Go back. Where did that come from? What made you conclude that that's who you are, and that's how you see this, and that's how you see the other? And if you keep doing that, and I've done it with a few people, they start to realize that all roads lead to the system. All roads lead to it, whether it leads through the education system, it leads to the media or Silicon Valley or whatever, all leads to the system. And if you can get young people to see that their thoughts, their perceptions, and their beliefs are being externally programmed and externally infused into them, then you've got a chance of them saying, well, how do I stop that? Well, how do you stop it? You conclude yourself consciously what you think you are, what you think of this situation, that situation, what you think of anything, you come to your own unique conclusion. And you do it by questioning what you're told, because you know you're being programmed now. So what's the benefit of programming? What's the benefit of making you believe what you now believe or you used to believe? And if you can get people to see that connection between their thoughts, their beliefs, their opinions, and their perceptions, and where it's all coming from, then once people realize that their perceptions are being externally manipulated, they've got a chance of taking action to stop that. Because that's what we have to do. The world is as it is because the world believes what it believes. It's as simple as that. So we have to take our minds back. And, if when people say, well, look, everybody says the same thing, so they can't all be wrong, can they? Well, okay, let's take what you all think and you all believe, and let's come back to from where all your thoughts and beliefs have actually come from. And if you chatted for long enough, people would realize that they all believe the same because it's all come from the same source. They've all been to the same school system, the same university system. They all watch or listen to the same mainstream media and Silicon Valley. Therefore, why wouldn't they all think the same when the source of what they think is the same? And when you look at the enormous numbers of ways of looking at the same thing, why would everyone think the same? Why would they? I mean, that's a giveaway for a start. There's so many ways of looking at different situations and different events and different outcomes and different possibilities. Why does everyone think the same? Does anyone think that's strange? Of course it's strange. But when you're all getting your information from the same source, it's not so strange. It's the way it's going to be until we take the power back to think for ourselves. And the greatest thing you can give to a young person, for me, is the power to think for themselves. Because then you start, and that's the other thing. When everyone thinks the same, society goes into an eddy. Stops moving forward, goes into an eddy. Everyone thinks the same. What drives society forward in terms of understanding is everyone not thinking the same. It's the people that broke the mold, that stepped out of the eddy, that have taken human society forward. Not the ones that followed, the ones that led. And that's what happens when you free minds on a big scale from the eddy. They start to conclude and come up with their own unique spin on things, understandings, insights, and suddenly the world moves on. Because suddenly the world becomes a much wider thinking collective mind and perceives greater and greater possibility that the eddy is denying them. So if you think the same as everyone else, it's time to find a mirror and ask it some questions. Because when stupid people say to me that I'm ridiculous, I thank them profusely. When people who don't think for themselves say you're crazy, I thank them profusely. Because if they said that they thought I was clever, then I'd be extremely worried. Because the only thing they believe is clever is what the authority tells them is clever. And I hope authority will never say that about me. It'd be a nightmare.
My two last questions, David. My first question is, what are you working on right now? And my last question is, who should I interview next? Who inspires you as a person?
Well, first of all, I'm just finishing a film, actually with a Dutch producer and director at Iconic, Christiana van Wyk, on the importance of the energy field that we call the British Isles, which relates to why do these tiny islands you can hardly see on the globe, why have they had such a massive impact on global events, and still do, only much more behind the scenes now. So that's what I'm doing that, and it's nearly finished actually. And who should interview next? Whoever your intuition tells you. I get my inspiration from out there. Sometimes it will manifest through other people, and I think they're impressive. I like what they're saying, but overwhelmingly, it comes from out there. And what's out there? The rest of my consciousness. If you live your life only perceiving the five senses and only operating the five senses and allowing the five senses to become the total arbiter of your sense of reality, your sense of self, you'll stay in the eddy, you'll stay in the little bubble, believing it's real. And when you realize that you are all that is, has been, and ever can be, having a brief human experience, you literally open your mind. Literally, you open that five sense mind to greater possibility. And suddenly insights come, awareness comes that wasn't there before. And that's not the Buddha sitting cross-legged on a mountain or under a tree. That's open to everybody. It's our natural state. And we have been manipulated into an unnatural state. We're not meant to be slaves. We're meant to be explorers of forever, not slaves. We've allowed ourselves to become enslaved by enslaving our own minds. That's what we've done, and enslaving our own perceptions, thinking small, thinking little me. So who you should interview next is anyone that's aware that they're big me.
That's the best.
Anyone is aware of their big me.
Me. I'm a musician by trade. I studied flamenco guitar, and music is very important for me. Do you listen to music, David?
I used to listen to music a lot. Yeah, I mean, my son's a musician.
You
look like a flamenco musician. You really do. Yeah.
Yeah. What is your son? A singer? He's
a singer-songwriter. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He's written some great stuff, but having me for a father wasn't great for a music career in the system. It wasn't something that was going to get a lot of encouragement to do from the system, because he had the wrong name. He's very, very talented. I think, and what is music? Music is vibration.
It is.
Frequency. What is this? What is this reality? If you break it down, it can be broken down to it. It's frequency. When you're depressed and you're fearful and you're anxious, these emotions, like our thoughts, are giving off frequencies all the time. Yeah. This is why when we're in states of anxiety or fear or depression, we say, I'm feeling so heavy today. Yeah. It's because the low vibrational nature of the generator of those frequencies from those emotions make your energetic field very low and slow, and it feels heavy and dense, and then you feel joy and happiness and love, and suddenly they're high vibrations, and so suddenly you say, I feel so light today. So this is why some music can really depress you, and some music can inspire you.
For example?
And some music, some of this headbanging stuff can completely shut you down. Yeah.
What did you listen to when you grew up?
Well, when I was growing up, I was a 60s child, wasn't I? I mean, I was
Beatles,
Flower Power and all that, yeah, that was my period. There's a lot of great music in the 60s, but a lot of manipulation as well. But yeah, the 60s music I used to love.
Yeah.
I like folk music as well. I like folk music. I like a lot of Irish folk music. And yeah, it's an important thing, music, but it's listening to the right stuff, really.
David, I'd like to thank you for your time. You were very generous. I'm going to share your story with my readers. Thanks for being who you are. Thanks for writing these impressive books. I'm just a novice, so it was a lot to comprehend, but really inspiring. So, David, thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, mate. Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, mate. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.